Hello and welcome to The Working Songwriter, the show where today's best songwriters come together and talk shop. I'm your host, Joe Pug. Each episode here, we meet a distinguished guest and we ask them to go deep on their inspiration, on their process, and on the general ups and downs of making a life in music. So, whether you're a grizzled veteran hiding in a remote Swiss village, just repeatedly clicking refresh on the web browser that displays your royalty statements, or otherwise a frustrated genius, patiently trying to explain to your father-in-law that America's Got Talent is not your particular route to success, this is your show. Because ultimately, it is what every writer seeks most, an ironclad excuse to put off actually writing. Hey everybody. Before we get started, I just want to thank everybody who came out to our Texas and Oklahoma shows. This last month we had a blast playing with the up-and-coming Mandolin Orange, who put on one of the best live shows I've seen in recent memory. They were great. In fact, among their own songs that they were playing, they were doing a tribute to Guy Clark by playing a cover of actually one of his wife's songs, Susanna Clark's song, Easy From Now On, which I'd never heard before and which totally bowled me over. Unfortunately, they don't have their version recorded of it yet, but if I were you, jump online and check out Emmylou Harris's version of that song if you've never heard it before, because it's a diamond. It's a great song. It was a pleasure also to play the Kessler Theater in Dallas, my first time there, and it's world class. It was great to head up to Oklahoma City and play the old Blue Door with Greg Johnson, an American original, at its helm. And thanks to everybody for all the suggestions you've been sending my way regarding guests that you'd like to see on the show. I've been lining up some great interviews for the rest of the year, and some of them are based on the leads you've sent my way. So thank you. If you'd like to hear some of my tunes live, I will be traveling west in July, so look out for me in San Diego, July 6th, Los Angeles, July 7th, San Luis Obispo, July 8th, San Francisco, July 9th, and then I'll be opening a few dates for the man himself, Josh Ritter, and those will be in Omaha, July 11th, Boulder, July 12th, and Aspen, Colorado, July 13th. Finally, if you've been listening to the show and enjoying it, the best way that you can help us out is simply by rating the show in the iTunes store or on the podcast app on your phone. It's so quick that you can probably do it right now as I'm jawing at you before the show begins. You could just open it up and do it. I know it sounds stupid. I know it sounds unnecessary. I know that I sound like a fucking NPR pledge drive right now, but suffice it to say, rating us in the iTunes store helps us out much more than it will be a pain in the ass for you. So thank you for doing that. That's all the housekeeping I have for you. Thanks for listening and enjoy the show. She is without dispute one of her generation's purest vocalists. She's an enviably prolific writer, and she's had a tour itinerary over the years that would have made the Ramones flinch. It is a great honor this month to host North Carolina's own Tift Merritt. Born in 1975 in Houston, Texas, she got to Raleigh just as soon as she could, where she spent her childhood. After a few years studying creative writing at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill, she decided to dive headfirst into the burgeoning independent music scene that surrounded the campus in the late 90s. Athens, Georgia always gets its due for being the liberal southern college town that produced one of the greatest bumper crops of influential American music, but I'd say Chapel Hill's claim to that mantle is just as strong and certainly less appreciated. Consider that when Tift left college, Chapel Hill was an incubator to indie rock luminaries Superchunk and Archers of Loaf, alternative country and folk pioneers Whiskey Town, the Squirrel Nut Zippers, and the $2 Pistols, and also home to what are today the elder statesmen of independent record labels, Merge and Yep Rock. Getting her start at the Cat's Cradle and The Cave, two beloved clubs in town, she developed a local following. After winning the songwriting contest at Wilkesboro, North Carolina's Merle Fest, the festival started by Doc Watson to celebrate Appalachian music, she graduated to the national stage with a signing to Universal Music Group imprint Lost Highway Records. She's appeared in concert with the likes of Emmylou Harris, Elvis Costello, Ray LaMontagne, and Mary Chapin Carpenter. She's made appearances on Austin City Limits, NPR's Mountain Stage, The Late Show with David Letterman, and later with Jules Holland. She's received a Grammy nomination for Best Country Album and an Americana Music Award nomination for Album of the Year and Artist of the Year. She has of late developed a powerful clarity in her own creative vision, remarking recently to an interviewer, "As you grow, what you thought mattered doesn't really matter at all, and that's a lovely surprise. All the noise dissipates, and you just don't really have any time for anything but the real things and the real substance, and that makes life really simple." So you grew up singing with your old man, I read, your dad. Is that true?
Yeah, I mean, not publicly.
Sure.
But on Saturdays, he would play piano or play guitar or play records and
What type of stuff?
folky stuff, a lot of Dylan, a lot of things that he could finger pick. He loves Percy Sledge. He loves Dolly Parton.
Yeah.
Kind of really eclectic, earthy stuff. And I think in a lot of ways that's how I started to think about music in a sort of genre-free way. The filter, I think, for my dad did it make him feel something, and could he figure out how to play it? Mm-hmm. So that was generally what he listened to.
And did he teach you guitar from there? Or?
Yeah, he did.
Okay. That's neat.
He did.
Were your folks, were they supportive when you said, "Hey, I'm going to try this, I'm going to make a life in music"? Were they worried?
Well, it was not the day that I announced that I was going to be artistic and do something like that didn't, have some foreshadowing.
Right.
And so I was probably too headstrong for my own good. And I always knew I wanted to be a writer or to do something creative. I didn't really know what my medium was going to be. So I don't think they were surprised by any of that, and they were super supportive of me. I'll wait until this truck goes
Thank
by.
You.
They were 2 trucks. They were super supportive of me cultivating work that I was passionate about. Mm-hmm. I think they were scared, and I know my dad was scared. And, when I think back about it, it scares me.
Yeah.
But, at the same time, I think this is probably true, not just of me, but of the time frame. This was, you didn't say, "Oh, I'm going to go be a musician and have a 10-year plan and right. Go, oh, I'm going to be on American Idol and I'm going to be famous," or something like that. I mean, I just started playing gigs, and I got more gigs, and I got more gigs after that. It wasn't, I'm always really surprised when people sort of say, "I'm going to go be a musician," like it's a choice that you can make that has logic.
I know, right. When people will say, like, "Well, what do you think? Should I quit my job and go into this?" It's just like, no, man. You should. I know exactly what you mean. Like, you get that one gig on Tuesday night, and now you're the opener on Friday night, and then you're like, "Oh, wow, I just sold out this tiny little club in town, and I don't have to work this month. My other job, I got some money in my pocket." And
I mean, people. They don't ask me this so much anymore, but, people would say, like what's the magic, you know, how my nephew wants to, and
Right.
what's the magic door? And you kind of hate to be the person that goes, there's no magic door.
There it is.
If
Yeah.
I'm still looking for it.
I wish that it would show up. So who was like in your mind at that time starting out, who was like the dream career that you could have? Who did you imagine yourself being?
Well, I wanted to, you know, I really loved Carole King and Emmylou and Joni Mitchell. And I really loved Skeeter Davis and Kitty Wells. And I think it's women who had something to say and held themselves with a certain amount of dignity. I mean, you know, this
Yes.
was probably about the time that MTV was in its heyday, and that wasn't what
You were about.
I gravitated to. I was probably, you know, pukey kind of earnest.
You were emo before emo was a thing.
But I wanted to be a writer. So Carole King and Joni Mitchell and women who had something to say. That
Yeah.
felt like some kind of grounding and power to me.
Yeah, absolutely. Were you working other jobs at that time to make ends meet?
Well, when I started playing in bars, I was in my late teens, and I had waitressing jobs. And I had a bunch of waitressing jobs, and I went to college in there, and I had jobs, you know,
Jobs.
doing stuff.
Yeah.
But I was just lucky, and I started making a little bit of money doing gigs, and then I quit my waitressing. I remember when I was 25, I got my record deal, my first record deal.
Well, there was a bit of a scene going on in the Triangle at that time in the late 90s, early 2000s, and that's actually how I became aware of your music. I went to school at Carolina in the early 2000s, and I was a huge fan of that band, $2 Pistols, which I told you
yeah.
about, and you did that split EP with them, with the great singer, baritone singer, John Howie Jr., used to be a punk drummer,
Yeah.
and then he kind of went back to his roots and began singing these very classic country baritone things. How would you describe the scene at that time in the Triangle in the late 90s, early 2000s? Who was running around?
Well, there were a lot of different kinds of music going on, and this, you know, the Squirrel Nut Zippers were around, and Andrew Bird's Bowl of Fire, I remember coming through, and there were a lot of really neat indie bands too, and Merge Records was here, and I remember we loved this band called Butter Glory, and you know, there was a club called the 506 that we would go see
Oh, yeah.
bands all the time, and we were kind of doing this rootsy songwriter, maybe songwriter country was the right way to say it. I never really thought of it as, you know, hardcore country or mainstream country or anything like that, but that's what we were doing. That's the kind of thing that I was writing. But all of the musicians, I remember all different kinds of musicians were supportive of us, and we would go see all different kinds of
Yeah.
bands play. So that was what was kind of neat about it was, you know, there were indie bands, there were rootsy bands, and it was a small group of people. It wasn't.
How did you fall in with the Pistols?
I just started opening some shows for them, and then John would ask me to sing a couple of songs, and then we cut that EP.
It's a great EP. You have that. You guys do a version on that of the Porter Wagoner at Dolly Parton, that classic duet. Oh my God, I was just listening to it in the car the other day.
Someone I used to know.
Someone I Used to Know. That's it. I love that version you guys do.
I think, don't George Jones and Melba Montgomery do a version of it too?
They might as well, but
I don't know.
I
John has such a great record collection of classic country stuff.
I mean, to go up against, because the Porter Wagoner or Dolly version, it's really funny because whoever mixed it, like, I mean, it's like 80% Dolly, like in the mix between like the voices, because her voice is so pure and so good, and the vocal performances there are out of control. But then on, it's a really, the rendition that you guys did on that album, like, it stands toe to toe, man. It's really
that's
cool.
really nice.
It really does, and I remember that from back in the day, and I'm telling you, I was driving in the car this week, A.B. and both of them going back and forth. And
that's funny.
It's a
really
great version.
Nice of you.
You first got kind of, it seemed to me, in reading about your early career, that maybe one of your first real foots in the door was winning a songwriting contest at Merle Fest.
Uh-huh.
Can you describe Merle Fest for people who have never been there before?
I mean, Merle Fest is a small, family-oriented roots music festival in the North Carolina mountains. And we heard about their songwriting contest, and I just submitted some songs. And what was neat is that I guess the next year I got to go back and have my own shows, and those were some of my first sort of proper gigs.
That's a heady time.
But I mean, we didn't. It just sort of precipitated us getting a manager, I think, is what happened. And I think there were a few, a couple of people mentioned us to this one manager. So we ended up getting a manager from that situation.
And that was the manager that would lead you to your first deal? In 2001? Cool. So at that time, leading up to that first deal, that seems to be like the last gasp of the old music industry. Because you've really, given where your career has been positioned, you've really gotten to see both sides of it.
I have.
So can you describe a little bit of the process at that time of getting signed to a label and being courted or courting them? What was that like at that time?
Well, I mean, I don't know that to me, the main thing that's changed is that there's no money. I mean, there were record budgets and video budgets and there was some money being thrown around, and that's what is different.
Yes.
The rest of it kind of wears the same clothes.
So
where somebody's, we always said that getting a record deal was, for a while it was like everyone in America had a CD of their own, and then everybody has a record deal, and it seems like we always knew that getting the record deal was really just the first step, and
right,
and it was exciting. It was really nice, I guess. I mean, I think what was really lucky about my early career was that I was in a situation where I was really on a label and with a manager that, he represented a lot of my heroes, and that was really just sort of being in that company was really exciting.
Being in that
for
conversation.
Me. Yeah, but I mean, I don't know that I've ever felt completely comfortable in the music industry or completely snowed by it or completely it just has always seemed like a slick place, and I'm not a very slick person.
Yeah.
So, that time just, I think your early anything, it just the promise of what could happen is so lovely. But a lot of it doesn't happen. And
Right.
then a lot of it did happen, and those, that's really wonderful. But, I certainly, to me, I guess the way that I would describe the change in the music industry is that, I have never been an artist. I've always been an artist that people wanted to be commercially successful, but I've never really been commercially successful.
Uh-huh.
And the amount of records that I sold in the beginning that people scoffed at
Right.
would now be a big number.
Yes.
And that is, you just watch the numbers go kind of in a different. You just watch it's in a different scale.
It really is. There's a parlor game that my wife and I play sometimes where at dinner we'll bust out Wikipedia on, the 100 highest selling albums of all time, and we'll be surprised by some of them. All of them are in like the 80s.
Yeah.
So it was like when the business was at its height, and also people would buy it on vinyl, then have to buy it on CD again. All of them are that except for Adele. It's like Meatloaf, Michael Jackson, I think of Madonna things on there, a bunch of AC/DC stuff, Pink Floyd, Adele, 21, 25 years later. But yeah,
Wow.
I mean, to see it is just a different, it is exponential.
I mean, honestly, if I were to be completely honest with you, I am not that interested in the music business.
Yeah.
I mean, what's interesting to me is having a sustainable practice as a writer and a musician, and by way of that, I have to have a relationship with the music industry, but it's not particularly interesting to me.
Yeah.
And I think what is interesting is trying to be an independent artist and to be smart and to try to have the capacity to do what you're capable of, which means having some money to hire who you want or some time in the studio or that kind of thing. But I think that's a really different lens than sort of trying to figure out the secret code of the music business, which it seems a lot like high school to me. And
It does. Yeah, I think it's the difference between trying to crack that code is trying to, I think I would liken it to starting a business that you want to get to a certain point and then sell to a larger corporation, or building your mom and pop store, whether you're selling coffee or whether you're selling angle irons, that you build relationships with your customers. They know to trust you. They support you in the lean times, For me, it's been really interesting that you have certain spikes in a career and then things will fall off for a little while. And it's really interesting to see the audience members that stick around, still come out to those shows when you don't have a big push going or something like that. It's, that's when you really see who your audience is. It's really neat. As Levon Helm once said in his autobiography, the two worst things a musician can say to his producer are, "I've been thinking," and "I'd like my band to play on the record." That was in reference to his first band leader, Ronnie the Hawk Hawkins, demanding to use his crew. The Hawk also told Levon at that time, "Stick with me, boy, because this is just hamburger money. Soon we'll be farting through silk." The divide between using their touring band or using session musicians is the classic Sophie's choice foisted upon singer-songwriters making a record. Over the course of her career, Tift has seen both sides of that divide. A quick glimpse over the personnel listings of her recorded catalog, and you'll notice a murderer's row of our nation's finest session musicians. Mike Campbell, Benmont Tench, Eric Haywood, John Convertino, Mark Ribot, Ethan Johns, and Greg Lease, just to name a few. But on her first record, she did what so few young band leaders have the confidence to do. She stood up and demanded to use her own band in the studio. Anytime you're on the same side of the issue as the Hawk, you're in good company. So, Bramble Rose was recorded with Ethan Johns at the helm. Where did you guys record that album at?
We did it at the Sound Factory in LA.
Okay. What was the workflow like on that album? What workflow did he bring?
What do you mean?
Just in the sense of how did he want to attack the album? Did he want you to write it there in the studio and you put it together song by song? Was the band in there when you started?
No. I wrote Bramble Rose actually here, and I went through the songs with him, and he was a great person to talk songs with. That was really fun. I went out to California and sat with him and played him everything. But I fought really hard to have my own band on that record.
I noticed that. Yeah.
And so Ethan, we were a 4-piece, and Ethan sort of did double or triple duty as engineer and producer and guitar player. But, we just did it live off the floor, which is really how I've made almost all of my records.
Really?
So,
Really? What did you learn from working with him in that process?
Well, he was really, I think at that period of time, what we were really aware of was trying to graduate from being a bar band to being a recording, a band that could record an album. Mm-hmm. And I think playing in bars, there's a certain all over the placeness that I had as a singer, and he really encouraged me to nail a melody and stick to it, and not maybe I don't know that I was conscious of it, but in almost a jazz singer improvisational way, when you're just touring or when you're just playing, when you're just performing the same songs over and over, bringing a newness to it seems like the right thing to do as a player. But he kind of schooled me in just stripping it back and sticking to the basics and being faithful to a melody. And I remember practicing in a whole new way that way. But everything was a learning experience at that point, because I hadn't made a record before.
So that's what you had to do as a vocalist to go from being a bar band to a recording band. What did the band have to learn about playing to become more of a recording band?
I think we were always really of a mindset that less was more. And I don't mean to. I think we were all probably thinking about different things in terms of our instruments at that time, but definitely less is more was always a something that we were really aware of, and I think we were always trying to create a very stable and sensitive bed for me to sing on top of. But at the same time, we were all in our 20s, and we were we were a healthy kind of aware, which means we were not overly aware of what we were trying to do. We were just trying to go and throw our whole hearts into it. And that's definitely what we did.
That record has a vitality to it that, I mean, I think it made it onto the tape big time.
Oh, good. Thank you.
Were you using any sort of specific references for that album?
I was. I early Bonnie Raitt records and early Linda Ronstadt records were definitely my model. And I remember we got reviewed in Spin, and they made fun of me for liking Linda Ronstadt. And I thought, oh my God, I thought that was the funniest thing I ever saw.
You were anticipating her hipster resurgence a decade later. Yeah, man. You go from making Bramble Rose with Ethan Johns to your next one was with George Draculius and brought in like Mike Campbell to play guitar, Ben Montench, guys from the Heartbreakers to play on that album. How did that experience?
School bus.
How did that experience differ from Bramble Rose? Specifically with Tambourine, I know that he did the next one as well.
Well, I mean, you know, that I was the same person. Mm-hmm. But, you know, working with George and working with Ethan were two totally different. I mean, they work in completely opposite ways. And I also, working with Ethan was a dream, mm-hmm. but working with George was, I had sat in the car with his records and said, I want to work with this guy when I was like 19 years old. Mm-hmm. I was such a Maria McKee fan and such a Jayhawks fan. And so I think actually at the time the record label was kind of like, okay, you need to hit. And
right.
And I just turned and said, okay, fine, but I want to work with George Draculius.
Here's who I'm doing it with. Yeah.
And I think nobody thought that he would be interested in working with me, so they said, okay. But George and I got along really well. He's such a wonderful guy. And at that point, you know, he pulled in all the musicians at that point, and I made a record without my band, which was mm-hmm. really a big deal for me. It was both exciting and also scary. I mean, very mm-hmm. scary. I'm a sort of tender person, and
what are the politics like that with the guys that are in your band? Was that a difficult thing, or did they understand?
I think everybody really understood, and I think, you know, I know there were sticky moments, but from the word go, everybody was always trying to get me to do things without my band.
That's, man.
And we were all, you know, we were a family, and I think that if it had been something that I didn't want to do, I wouldn't have done it. You know, of course I wanted to go make a record with Mike Campbell.
Yeah, come on.
And it was a really exciting opportunity for me, and there were ways that everybody could get involved, but it was also, you know, for us to, we were on the road with Tambourine for a year.
Right.
And that was certainly, you know, Mike Campbell wasn't on the road with us. It was us. Right. So there were, I don't know, I think people implant kind of these dramatic situations on bands. And I think it was pretty obvious to us all what the right thing to do was.
It's a really interesting way of looking at it. They like to implant dramatic situations. Because I know what you mean. People have, on the business end of things, have reasons for wanting to, or they think that they have reasons for wanting to hear things differently. But I feel like it's always phrased in a very adversarial way, as opposed to the way that you described it. You're like, well, of course, I've always wanted to work with George Ezra. Of course, I want Ben Montents to put some B3 on a record, and this sounds like a creative opportunity here to me, rather than like a cutting out of the old guys here. It's like, no, it's not what this is about.
I mean, and this is a long time ago.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, this is 12 years ago now.
Yeah.
And so now I've had a band for something like 12 or 15 years. And I think that you have to have some mindfulness about what you're doing, maintaining a band. I mean, I think every band in the world would like to be we live and die and breathe and bleed each other. But, I can't pay everybody. It's not feasible to, it's not feasible. And so there are things that I have to go do, and then there are things that I get to take everybody. And, I also, especially at that point in time, I was able to keep that band intact with the same rhythm section and, some alternating players for almost 10 years. And
that's an achievement. It really is.
And that was, I think, we were just like a relationship. We were really mindful of how to grow together, how to not stagnate. And part of that was often to try to bring new people in and shake things up and push ourselves and, and make our world bigger. And that would kind of allow us to have room to grow into something for a year or two, and kind of up the, I don't know, we were careful about that. We were thoughtful about it. And then you kind of get to the point where you're just touring a lot, or you tour a whole lot for a year and then you don't tour for 2 years or something like that, and it kind of all goes to hell. So, having a band is just, we started out as a very sweet group of friends, and there wasn't any showbiz in it. And I think we tried to really keep it that way.
As much as possible.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's a real achievement to have kept the same band on the road for 10 years. I mean, really, maybe people who are listening who don't do this for a living kind of want to understand, because you think to yourself, like, what's the big deal? You pay everybody, you go out on the road. But it's the margins in the last 10 years have become so tight that to keep people employed 12 months a year, it's really tough, because they can't tour for 7 months and then have 5 months off. They're screwed when they get back.
And and in these days, people started going different directions about 2000. Now everybody's kind of off on the four winds, but everybody's in their 40s or 50s now, and we kind of all had to figure out what we were doing.
There's different priorities now. Yeah, absolutely. You ended up doing your next one after Tambourine, again with Draculius, but this time you decamped to Paris to write for a little while. So I'd like to use that idea as just kind of a springboard for how do you stay, what are some techniques that you use as a writer to stay inspired and to find inspiration? I'd have to think that going to Paris, you wanted to.
Yeah, going to Paris was a big accident. I just ended up. I was over there for my first European tour, and I decided that I was going to take a vacation in Paris, and I rented a flat with a piano, and then I just ended up staying because it was super inspirational, and it was just a super happy time and really suited me. I like being out of my element. I like being out of my, the cultural supposed to's.
Mm-hmm.
I loved being immersed in another language, and Paris is a place that is just extremely aesthetically pleasing and visually taste-wise. Everything is, very artistically done there. So I felt, where I think in America maybe there's a mindset of, can we sell 1 million of these and can we produce it in a factory? Mm-hmm. There, the mindset is more like, oh, that's so interesting. It's one of a kind. Right. And so I just got along really well there, and it was a very serendipitous time. So that was super inspiring.
But on a given day, and I just want to dig in a little bit more there, on a given day, then in Paris or now, if you have a day to yourself to write, what does that day look like? Can you kind of walk me through, if you have a day set aside for writing, what does that day look like for you?
Well, I would probably start just with free writing, and then I would turn to instruments after that, and then, and then at a certain point, when I had just the right amount of coffee, I'm a big believer in revision. I usually start a song just from something that I've written, randomly, and sort of put it together.
So you have do you have a bone pile of melodies and snippets of lyrics that you can pull from then that you like to work from?
No, I really, I don't have a bone pile because I really don't salvage a whole lot. If it doesn't sort of get up and walk right away, then...
See you later.
It doesn't... I sort of chalk it up to clever or not strong enough. But I usually have a batch of stuff that I'm working on. Mm-hmm. And so I just kind of try to give myself some freedom, and then I try to pay attention to my instrument, which I think is... it's good to get out of words. And then I kind of try to come back to what I'm working on and start... see where I can take it, and take it as far as I can take it, and then move on, and not pound it to the ground. I'm a big believer in revision. I'm a big believer in sitting at my desk all day, and I'm a big believer in just spending time with your instrument too. Mm.
And you mentioned before we got started taping today that you did some work in the past doing Pro Tools editing stuff. Do you end up putting together demos then yourself?
I don't. I really, I think when it's me, just by myself, I tend to think that something really stripped down is the most revealing way to explore a new song. Because if it, it's really easy to make something stand up on it's to prop it up with a bunch of stuff.
Yes.
So I generally stay very stripped down in the beginning, and then when I have something, I go, ooh, let's get to, I want to play this with some people, see what happens.
Gotcha. And so the fleshing out would really happen a lot more once you hit something with a producer at that point, or?
Or with musicians that I trust. But, I generally, when I'm working on a group of songs by myself, I tend to think that's the hardest way to pull off a song is stripped down, so I stick to that.
It is. No, it really is. I mean, it's just, you think about the difference between a band show and a solo show, and I know a lot of people that are in bands that say, oh, I'm going to go out and do a solo tour now, as if a solo show is just the same as doing exactly what you do with the band, except the band is not there. And it's like, no, it's very different. There's a lot more heavy lifting that you have to do. And it's the same with just the songs themselves in a recorded format. Even when you hit El Paso, tucked away on the Mexican border in the middle of the Chihuahuan Desert, you still have another 3 hours to drive. In fact, Marfa, Texas is so remote that the U.S. military used it as a staging ground for its chemical warfare battalions during the Second World War. Consider it a poor man's Los Alamos. The town's a blip on the map, with a corporate boundary of 1.6 square miles, less than 2,000 residents. But it's had an outsized influence on American art and culture. In 1971, the minimalist modern artist Donald Judd purchased several decommissioned military hangars and began fabricating his massive sculptures inside of them. Judd, whose work has been exhibited by the Whitney, the Tate Modern, and MoMA, eventually made the West Texas town his home. Though he passed away in 1994, the mark he left has made the town a mecca for artists of all disciplines to this day. And it's truly surreal to visit this small speck in the middle of Texas. Nothing but desert and gas station pizza for hundreds of miles in any direction, that is a home to musicians, painters, architects, and 2 restaurants that serve world-class cuisine. If you've ever seen that picture of the Prada store in the middle of the desert, which is itself a modern art installation, you'll get an idea of the cognitive dissonance that is Marfa. In the 1950s, Rock Hudson, James Dean, Elizabeth Taylor filmed the movie Giant in Marfa, and they all stayed in the historic Paisano Hotel, which is still in operation in the center of town. You could get a room and a cocktail there tonight. Half a century later, film crews for both the Coen brothers' No Country for Old Men and P.T. Anderson's There Will Be Blood set up shop in town. My wife and I love the town so much that Virgin Islands be damned, we spent our honeymoon there. So imagine my surprise when I learned that Tift not only had a history with the town herself, but hosted a radio show for their NPR affiliate, KRTS, called The Spark with Tift Merritt. On it, she interviewed artists working in many different mediums, such as author Nick Hornby, poet C.K. Williams, and painter Wolf Kahn. Not to mention a whole slew of musical guests like Roseanne Cash and Andrew Bird. Naturally, I wanted to hear her describe her relationship with that magical little oasis in the middle of the deep Texas desert. How did you end up out in Marfa, Texas at first, and eventually hosting a radio show of your own for their public radio station? How did you first land there?
Well, I landed there because my friend Liz Lambert took me to Marfa. She'd been trying to get me out there for so long. And I don't know why it took me a long time to go with her, but I just never thought after I got to Austin that I wanted to drive another 7 hours.
I know.
And then once I got to Marfa, I was like, oh, whoops, I'm only coming to Marfa from now on. Yeah. I love Marfa. But, you know, it was kind of a coincidence that I ended up working with their public radio station. And it was really a period of time where I just was lonely. Mm-hmm. And I wanted to talk to other artists about what I was going through and trying to answer my own questions. And I really didn't want to talk to musicians about it. I wanted to talk to people in other genres of work. And I wanted to... I think I was feeling the creative limitations of the road and the creative limitations of... having to practice on the road, which, is really hard. You're just trying to stay healthy and do the show, and that's the mark you hit. And if you're suddenly living all the time on the road, you're creative practice is kind of getting neglected in this funny way. So I just wanted to talk to people that were making things. And I also, the questions that I was concerned with were really more the inverse of life on the road, where I think life on the road is really about this moment where you're like, oh, I made this and it sprung forth perfectly formed and it's now got a PR campaign and we shine it up and present it to you.
Yes.
And that's not really a particularly revealing or interesting moment to me either. I was really more interested in talking to people about how to maintain a creative practice over a life. And, I sort of felt myself moving into some new places and having different doubts or different questions.
What were those new places and what were those doubts specifically?
I don't know that I can totally point a finger to it now. I think, let me think for a second. I think for one thing, I know that I was thinking a lot about how do you know what to do next, and how do you know what idea is worth pursuing and what isn't. But I think most of all, sort of the clash in music between intimacy and well, what would you call it? The social aspect of music,
Yes.
this celebratory aspect of music where it's sort of inclusive of everybody and it's a party and it feels great. Somewhat the way that soul music is just throws down and everyone can be a part of that, versus that sort of one-on-one conversation that is a different kind of intensity, and how to navigate that, how to have both, can you have both at the same time, or do you tend to both in different ways in different songs? And I don't know. I think I've always had a lot of questions. Yeah. So it was that show is really more about the questions that a certain artist's work brought up in my mind, and that usually had a natural overlap with things that I was mulling over or working out in my own work. But it just seemed like I can have the conversation about creative process and creative practice over and over and over again, and that seems like a conversation that's actually really worth having, where I'm not sure I enjoy the conversation about, let me show you my new product and the 3 sentences that I fashioned to tell you about it. Like I don't enjoy that conversation that much, but sort of getting to the real, people that make unique work generally make unique lives too, and I think that's interesting.
So that's what you were going to. You wanted to figure out how you wanted to move in a direction that was more. You mentioned earlier that you felt like for a long time the people on the business end of things wanted you to be mainstream, accepted in a way that your music was never going to be.
Look, I would love to be for any of that to happen, but I'm not going to. I just have to be myself.
Yeah.
Fortunately,
exactly. So,
and if that were to happen, it would just have to be natural
and on your own terms.
Yeah.
And on the terms of your art. I want to dig in a little bit more on what you were saying about the difference between the social aspect of kind of touring the music and the communion of it, and the intimate aspect of it, of someone listening to a record by themselves with headphones. And because I think it's not something that people in other arts really have to deal with as much. Like, I really think it's two vastly different mediums, like someone communing with a record and then coming to a show. And because half the audience is going to be there, like, you've moved on as an artist from a record that you recorded 2 years ago, and yet someone just discovered that record 3 months ago. They got really into it. They want to hear everything from, Traveling Alone tonight at the Cradle or whatever. And to them, it's this very special, sacred moment. And to you, you're a different person than when you wrote that record.
Well, I mean, I think that that's my responsibility in my work and as a performer to write something that can have meaning over time. And
Sure.
that meaning will change. So I don't, if I played you a song off of my first record now, hopefully it's written in a way that it stands on its own and can hold whatever I need it to mean, or however it's changed. That meaning can change over time and hold both people's.
Sure, but maybe finding that new meaning is, you were describing how it can be strangely, creatively stifling to be on the road.
Well, yeah, I think that's more the nature of repetitive performance.
Right.
Like when you, and it's been a long time since I was able to be on the road that much that I felt that way.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, anybody who's going to do the same show 100 nights in a row is going to have to come up with, and with being exhausted, you have to come up with ways to make it new to yourself, without artifice. But but I mean, I think that's what music. I mean, that's where you just get out of the way and you let your instrument talk and you let music talk and you really listen to the people you're playing music with. And I think that makes room. You get yourself out of the way.
That it, when it's going right, yes, that is. I agree with you. Sometimes it can be tough to get there on a longer tour.
Yeah, it definitely can.
Can you think of off the top of your head, regardless of what a particular tour did for you professionally, like what was in that time in your 20s, what was just like the funnest damn tour that you ever did that was just, you got off the road and you were like, what just happened?
I mean, I think all the touring for Tambourine was really fun, but also really grueling. It was a really hard record to sing. We followed Elvis Costello's tour bus. We were working really hard.
You were in a van.
We were in a van. But we had such a great time, and, it was just, we played really loud, and we had a lot of drinks, and
Yeah, man.
it was really, really fun.
Yeah. Sometimes people can take it so seriously that you have to just be like, cool, but we're also not working in a bank here, guys. And there is some elements of tours that I look back on where I think to myself, like, man, I really drank too much on that tour. We had a little bit too much fun. And then you think to yourself, well, I was fucking 25 years old and traveling across the country with my buddies in a van, seeing places I had never seen before. Like, I don't know that I would have wanted to take it more seriously in some of those places.
Yeah, I'm trying to, I mean, I have a lot of, I don't know that I can answer that question because on one hand I was the den mother, and I was married to somebody in the band, and so it was, in a lot of ways, it did feel like our whole lives sometimes. But then it was also so much fun, and so fun to find the vintage stores and the mom and pop places to eat, and turn the radio up and sleep in hotels and that kind of thing.
Or come back to a city and say to yourself, like, oh, I know the breakfast place here. now,
Yeah.
or I know that's a special part. Looking back over the last 15 years, what's an achievement that you were just, without qualification, just really proud of, and that you'd like, your kid to know about their mom's career before they were around?
Oh, wow. Yeah, I wonder if my child will even think of me, that way by the time that it'll be really.
You have to wonder.
I don't know. I that's such a good question.
Like fast forward 20, 25 years, and they're rummaging through some boxes in the house, and they come across, a clipping saying something about, what you did. Or, of course, there's going to be no clippings in 25 years because
It'll all be digital.
we're going to be inside the matrix at that point. We'll be the slaves to the machines. But you get my point. Like when they finally, because of course you're just.
Well,
I had,
my daughter. I just had a daughter, and by the time she's 10 years old, I'll be 50, and she won't ever have any idea that I wore revealing outfits and had a really good time in my 20s.
Right.
So I think I want her to know that I was a multifaceted person. But I think the main thing, I didn't always get it right. I didn't always get it wrong either. But I always have tried really hard, and I've always put my whole heart in it, and for better or for worse. And I would want her to know that.
Yeah.
And that, I always followed my instincts, even when my instincts were wrong.
Yeah. I think intuition is so important for this.
And also, I hope that she knows that my work and the things that I wrote about were, me pursuing some kind of wisdom, some kind of something true, some kind of answer to the questions that I had. Just me doing the best that I could with that, and really sincerely trying to do those things. I hope that she can feel that from my work.
And if the collected wisdom that you found in that time had to be compressed into one of your songs and given to her as a worldview for you, which one of your songs do you think expresses the worldview that you've come to?
Oof.
The
Ouch.
most?
That's really a huge question.
Well, I don't. Maybe it's not. Like maybe if
I figure they'll probably put bramble rose on my grave, but I think that's certainly a moment where I was imagining myself and my life in front of me, and it's an interesting thing to pick that up at a later point where I have some of the answers, but there's still time in front of me. But I don't know that I've written a song that I can say completely defines my life or who I am or my heart. Certainly it's the small Rubik's Cube pieces of it, but that's why I have to keep writing.
That's why you got to keep writing until you write the master song, and then you can quit and start selling insurance.
But there is no master song. There is no master song, and you write one
Amazing
song
Grace.
in your heart.
Amazing Grace might be.
Maybe. I'm not talking about. I'm talking as a writer. Where you write one thing and it feels so big and so true, and then you grow into it and your heart evolves and you have to write something else.
You do, but as you were saying earlier, hopefully you're writing in a way where you wrote it in a timeless enough way where you can return to it later and still understand maybe where you were coming from.
Yeah, absolutely. But it always changes.
we can leave it there. It does always change. Thanks for rapping with me, Tiff. I appreciate it. Cheers. That's our show for this month, guys. Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed it, the best way to support, as I mentioned before, is just to review us over in the iTunes store. It's a few moments, it's free, it helps us out a great deal. Tiff's latest album is called Traveling Companion. It's available anywhere digital music is sold. This episode was engineered by Saman Kajinian and mixed by Matt Schusler. If before we meet again, you sit down to write, please remember, an expensive microphone is not a song, a record deal is not a song, and most importantly, reverb is not a song. So let all that take care of itself, and for you, just keep your eye on the song.